Welcome to month 3 of the Peppermint and Pine sew along. This month we're going to be making this adorable gingerbread man tree topper for our Christmas tree, and these candy blocks, and this row of it's kind of a bunting row, I don't know, but it's a shelf. Let's call it a shelf for our tree. The directions walk you through step by step how to piece in your rickrack, and then once this quilt is all put together, we'll go ahead, once it's quilted, I haven't done it yet because I just finished binding it, but we'll put button eyes and buttons down there and button eyes on the snowmen, but you're going to want to make sure it's all quilted up first before we do that. So thanks for joining us for month 3, and join us next month for month 4. All right, here we are. We've got our month 3. Our first block of month 3, which is actually block number 6, the Gingerbread Man. We've got it all cut out. We've got our pieces labeled, and we've got our 13 inches of our little baby rickrack. You also can or cannot add, you could or couldn't, whatever you decide, add little black eyes to the snowmen that we made last month and to this gingerbread man. Either way, I think it's cute with or without them, but I do think you need the rickrack to make the gingerbread man look really good. I think you need the rickrack. So I'm going to add the rickrack. If you decide to add buttons, don't add the buttons until after it's quilted. Then you'll have to bury your knots a little bit, but it's worth it because then if you have it pantographed, you can't. Because if the presser foot of the long arm hits one of those buttons, it'll just shatter the button. And then you can add them afterwards and not have any problem and not have to worry about going around them or do custom quilting if you're not really into that. So here we go. Let's get started on the gingerbread man block. The very first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the headpiece, which is M, and we're going to take 2 B squares, and we're going to go ahead and do our flipped corners right here, and then we'll come back. All right, there we've got our little head section stitched, and we want to press those out, and then we want to go ahead and take A and stitch it on each side of the head. Just like this, and then the other side. And we're gonna press to A. All right, I'm just gonna slide that up there. And now we'll go to our arm section. And our arm section's fun because this is where we're gonna add our rickrack. So we wanna take O, our O piece, and we wanna stitch B on all 4 corners using our flipped corner method. You guys are getting so good at this. Just like that, and we're going to go ahead and do that with all of our corners. And then when we come back, we're going to stitch our rickrack on our arms. Very exciting. I'm going to go ahead and stick this up because we're going to draw a diagonal line or a straight line. And I like to do that with the little bit of grip that the mat gives me. You may have a sandpaper board. I don't really care for that. I get too wide of a line. So I'm going to grab this, and you're going to want to put your 1-inch mark right here. You can see that along the edge of the arm, and put a nice pencil line there. And you're going to do that right here. You're going to use this raw edge as your reference point. Now what you're going to do is you're going to take your little piece of rickrack, and you are going to sew right down the middle of it. And you're going to keep that centered over your pencil line. You can hang a little over on each end and then cut it, because we're going to catch the ends of these in our next seam. So we're going to do one side and we're going to do the other, and then we're going to meet back here. All right, there we go. There we've got our arm section done. We don't need to do anything else with that. We'll come in 1/4 inch and it'll be just perfect. Now let's work on our legs. So you want to grab your 2N and you want to grab your C squares. Now it doesn't matter, these are squares. It doesn't matter which corner, but we're only going to do one corner. And we're going to go like this, and then we're going to do another corner, and we're going to go like this. And that is because then we're going to put our rickrack in so that we can catch it in our other corners. So we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. So let's just do one corner each. Again, We're working with squares, so it doesn't matter which corner, just one on each end. All right, this is how they're going to be oriented. So now we have our C flipped corners done on one corner of N. So, and they both press out, which is great. Now you want to measure again for your rickrack for the legs. And how we're going to do this is we want to go 3/4 of an inch out from our seam of C and draw a line. Okay, and then you're going to do the same thing, 3/4 of an inch out and draw a line. With your pencil, Frixion pen, it doesn't matter, you're going to cover it up. Now we're going to take our rickrack. Isn't that going to be cute? Okay, and we're going to do the same thing, and we're going to let that hang over just a little bit. We're going to try to center it right over our pencil line so we don't see it, trim it off, and then we're going to go back and do the other one, and that way we'll catch these seams when we do our remaining flipped corners. So let's get our rickrack stitched down. All right, we're starting to get there. This is such a cute little block. Now we want to do our opposite corners on each piece, and we're going to want to go ahead and use C again and do a flipped corner and a flipped corner and a flipped corner and a flipped corner. Now it's really important because this particular one is going to press in. It's going to be counterintuitive. All the rest of them are going to press out. Press this one in, and that way when we go to make our center seam of the legs, these two seams nest. All right, now I know it's a little bulky to press this opposite direction than what's intuitive because you've got your rickrack in there. I just added a couple extra drops of starch there, just heavier there, and that way I still can see I still got a nice press. Now what we want to do is we want to push this together, and we want to nest this, line everything up, and sew our 1/4 inch seam. Now you're going to want to take and sew the head unit on the top of the arms and sew the leg unit on the bottom of the arms, and then you're going to want to go ahead and press towards the head and press towards the leg. We're going to press away from the arms because it reduces the bulk because of the rickrack. See you back here. All right, look at this little cutie. Isn't that adorable? And this is one of those blocks that almost takes longer to cut it out than it does to stitch it up. So here we go. We're going to finish this row out. So now what we want to do is we want to stitch H on each side, right sides together, and then we'll press towards H, and then we're going to go ahead and put G, stitch G to the top and bottom, and we want to match the center so that we get this nice and pinned in and the centers match, and then we'll meet back. We'll have a completed row. And just like that, we've got our entire top row, our gingerbread tree topper done. That's month 3, block number 6. Now we're going to move on to block number 7 for month 3. All right, let's proceed with month 3. We're going to go to block 7, and this is our Peppermint Candy block. And we're going to be making 4 of these little blocks this month. So the first thing we're going to need is our P and our Q. All right, so here we are with our P and our Q squares. And we're going to turn these into 4 half square triangles. And the way to do that is to draw your diagonal line on the back of your light squares. Remember, I use the Cluck Cluck Sew diagonal tape, so I don't need to draw my diagonal line. Some of you do. Some of you have other things you use. If you don't, draw a diagonal line. But that's why you don't see a diagonal line on any of my flipped corners or half square triangles. So what I want to do is I want to line these up really carefully, and I want to stitch a 1/4 of an inch on each side of my diagonal line. All right, I've got 4 half square triangles made. I've gone over the half square triangle method before, and you know that I like to square mine up before I press them. So I'm going to do that. and meet you back here. You can use your favorite method of squaring up. If you don't know how to do that, I do have a video on how I square up. So I'm going to take a sec, square these up, and then we'll move on. All right, so now I've got my 4 half square triangles made. They're all pressed to the red. Now I want to lay these out per the diagram, which is just like this. All right. And it's super important that you follow the diagram for this so that you have it spinning this way. If you make a mistake and yours spins the other way, the most important thing is not to rip that out. Just make sure that you follow that when you make your next 3 so that they all spin the right direction. Because when we sew them into our banner row, if you've got 1 or 2 spinning opposite, it's going to be really noticeable. So take this, I'm going to take this over and I'm going to stitch this together, and I'm just going to flip this over, stitch the 1/4 inch seam, flip this over and stitch the 1/4 inch seam. And you will notice, because of the way we pressed, everything nests right in. Okay. All right. And then you want to press to the redder side, which I did. You can see that. And then they should fit together so nicely. All of your seams will nest. And then you want to put this together, and you want to stitch this 1/4 inch, taking care to go right through the intersection point right there. It's hard to see because I'm using a very light thread, but stitch right through there 1/4 inch. Alrighty, there you go. Now we want to take our J squares. We need 4 of those that we've already pre-cut. And we want to do a flipped corner on each corner so that we get the rounded effect for our little peppermint candy unit. So we're going to lay these out on each corner, and then we're going to stitch on our drawn line and then cut those away. And all of these can be pressed out because when we connect these, we're going to put a sashing strip between them. So we don't have to make sure that each candy nests. Okay, so press them all out once you get them sewn on there. Okay, doke. There we go. Now we have 1 peppermint candy block made, but we need to go ahead and make 3 more. So let's make 3 more so we can put our banner together. All right, now through the power of television, we are cooking with gas, and we have all 4 of our peppermint candies put together. They're all swirling the same way, so that will be great. Now what we want to do is we want to take our K pieces, and we have 3 K, and we want to stitch these all into a row with K in between the blocks, and we're going to press to K. Once we get that done, we'll come right back. All right, we've got our cute little candy. Look, I have a little bubble there, but it'll quilt out and I'm not going to worry about it. But we're now going to stitch L on each side of this. Right sides together. And then when we finish stitching L to each side, we're going to stitch G, and we're going to center it. We're going to pin it, and we're going to center it, and we're going to stitch it to the bottom of this row. And then we'll come back with our finished peppermint candy row. Alrighty, there we go. We've got our peppermint candy row stitched together. We've got G on the bottom. And I want to give you another quick reminder to go ahead, probably can't tell, but back tack these. Since this is a block of the month and we're making our rows as we go, and this is gonna, take 6 months at the least amount of time to get this done. Depending on your schedule, it could take more, and it'll just help lock these seams at the end of these rows since they're going to be handled, and then we're going to put them together. And so I would recommend just back tacking just when you're putting the ends of these rows. All right, there we go. Now we will meet back here to finish up month 3 with our banner for block number 8. All right, here we are for our final step for month 3. You guys are rocking it. We're going to get this done. the first thing we're going to do is make our flying geese using F and D. Now, what we're going to do is I'm going to draw, well, you know I'm not, but for all intents and purposes, I'm going to draw a diagonal line on the wrong side of all of these D squares, okay? And then I'm going to do 4 at a time and chain stitch these. So how I'm going to do that is I'm going to take this over to my ironing station and I'm going to glue these down in the upper right hand corner and stitch right on the line or just one thread width outside the line on each 4 of these. And then I'm going to trim it and I'm going to press out, and I'm going to do all 4 of those, and then we'll do the other side. So that's how this is going to roll. We're going to do this, and then we'll be back to do the other side and get our flying geese units. All right, here we go. We're all pressed this way. We've got all 4 done. And now we're going to do the same thing on the opposite corner, except we're going to stitch from this corner towards the center, just a thread width outside of our drawn line. Now, people ask me why I don't write my patterns with half square triangles so they can be squared up for accuracy. But why don't I write my patterns like that for flying geese? And I will tell you the reason why. It's because I don't want you to go out and have to buy a bunch of specialty rulers to sew any of my quilts. That being said, you can square up a half square triangle with a block lock or any fancy ruler. I like a block lock or the rulers I showed you earlier. But you can also use a square. Sorry, I've got sticker on there. But you can also use any square ruler with a 45-degree line to square up a half square triangle. You can square up a flying geese with a regular square or rectangular ruler, but there's math involved and it changes per size of your flying geese unit that you're making. And because of that, there's a few steps. It's a little complicated. Some people don't love math like I do. And that way, if I write it bigger and you have to go in and square it up, it's going to be a lot easier if you invest in flying geese rulers. And I don't want you to have to do that if you sew my patterns. If you choose to, that is great. But I want my patterns accessible to the masses without a huge outlay of specialty rulers to do any of my patterns. So that is why I don't write my flying geese to be squared up. So back to this. We're going to draw a diagonal line and we're going to stitch one thread width on the outside, and we're going to stitch these floor. We're going to trim them 1/4 inch from our stitching, and then we're going to press them out. All righty. Now we want to orient our 4 flying geese that we just made pointing down. And just in case you're not sure why these are flying geese or what's part of them, this is considered the sky and this is the goose. Sometimes the goose is the more dominant color, as in this case, because I want those to show. I want the sky portions to fade into the background. But sometimes if I'm going to make a sawtooth star or something, I want this to be background, whatever color that is, and I want the star points to pop. And then that's how that would go if you were doing it. So see how they're kind of light and this is dominant. So it just depends on how you're going to use your flying geese as to which way you do your coloring. But in this case, we want them all oriented so that they're pointing down or flying towards you. So as you can see from your directions, we're going to want to press the right, if they're oriented up, the right to the sky and the left to the goose. So this is the goose, this is the sky. We want to go ahead and press that direction, orient these towards us now, like the picture, because we are going to nest these together. So if we have one pressed that way and one pressed this way, we won't have those seams stacked on top of each other. We'll have them bumping up to each other, which makes a much better row. Now, if you're using a block lock ruler, in order to have the gutter in the right spot for trimming up, you're always going to want to press to the sky. This is only 4 geese in a row. Either way, it's fine. You're only bumping 3 seams, so it's not the end of the world if you're stacking them here. But I want mine to nest, so I've written the directions that way. So if you note the pressing directions, that will make these all nest together better. So you want to go ahead and sew all these 4 geese together into a nice row. Alrighty, and then you want to press them all to the left like your pattern shows. And then you want to take eye and you want to stitch it on the top. And this is important. You don't want to stitch it on the bottom. You want to stitch it on the top. So make sure that your geese are all flying towards you or pointed down. And then you want to stitch eye on the top of this and press to eye. Once you've done that, then we're going to go ahead and we're going to stitch E on each end and press to E. So the first thing we're going to do is stitch this, press it that way, and then stitch E to each end, and we'll meet back here. Alrighty, now we have our banner, and this is our banner for our candy row that we made in the last step. So now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and of course center and pin, and we want to stitch G to the bottom of this. Just like that. We're going to line up our centers and stitch it in. And then we'll come back and stitch our candy row into the top. Please don't forget to backstitch at the ends. Let's get these stitched. Alrighty, look at that. We've got our banner pieced. And this is going to go below our peppermint candy row. Now remember, in the last step, we already stitched a G below this. This goes on top of our row, not on the bottom of our row, okay? So we want that, and I want to point out a couple things about this block of the month and any other block of the months that I write. The first thing is if at all possible, I have you start constructing larger and larger segments as you work through the block of the month. The reason I do this is so that when you get all of your blocks or units made from however many months it runs, 6, 9, 12, 10, whatever, this case it's 6, you don't have the entire quilt to put together at the last month, because then I don't know, that seems a little overwhelming sometimes. So I have you piece bigger chunks as we go, so that when you actually get to the end of making your blocks, your construction of your quilt goes together pretty quickly. I mean, there's still going to be, you can only do so much. We can't start adding borders to this until we get the whole center made, but we're getting chunks done. So at that last month, you really can just start putting this quilt together and not have, you know, all this work facing you. That's the one thing I wanted to point out. The other thing I wanted to point out is also notice, and I do this a lot, I want to give your eye not just a place to rest, like here. There's a lot going on in this quilt. We don't want all of our rows squished together. But I also like to put in little sashings where I can, if it works, and sashing rows and things like that, so that when you're putting your quilt together or your units together, you have less opportunity for seams to overlap and butt up against each other or need to nest and match. This takes that out of it. But because of that, it's super important to pin, because you want to be in the center. So you don't want this offset because you didn't pin it in and you just started at one end and sewed down the other. So because of that, to keep it visually centered, you want to pin it. But also it reduces the amount of bulky seams and overlaps and bumps up that you might have. So I hope you appreciate that. I like that for 2 reasons. Like I said, I like my eye to have a place to relax on the quilt, but I also don't like to mess with seams that are all going the same direction, that don't nest and that are just piled on top of each other. All right, so let's get this stitched together, and then we are done for month 3, and we will be halfway through this block of the month. Way to go, guys. All righty, look at how cute she is. This is going together so nice. I'm going to wrinkle it up a little bit so you can see the ends. But yes, I backstitched, and you want to press towards the candy row, which is this G strip that we added the last block section of this month. All right, guys, we're done with block 3, and meet back here for block 4 next month.